The fluorescent lights burned into my skull. "Lauren Harper, stay with us," the nurse snapped, fingers digging into my wrist. Everything hurt. My head, my back, the ribs that cracked when I hit the marble floor. They told the doctors I was delusional, that I couldn't be trusted with my own money, that I needed protection from myself. And 45 minutes before I ended up in this ER bed, every single one of them, my parents, my brother, aunts, uncles, cousins, sat around the massive oak table in our family house and watched my mother slide the transfer papers towards me. "Sign it, Lauren," she said, voice sweet as iced tea, "or you're no longer part of this family." I said no. My brother laughed. Then he put his hands on my shoulders and shoved. Hard. I remember the shock on their faces when I didn't get back up. I remember the screams. I remember thinking, as the room spun, that maybe this time they'd finally gone too far. And right then, while they were still arguing over who should call 911, the front door opened, and a man none of them expected walked in, carrying a leather briefcase and a secret my grandfather took to his grave. In less than 10 minutes, he turned their victory into silence so thick you could have heard a heartbeat stop. If you've ever had your entire family decide you owe them your future just because you were born into the same bloodline, this one's for you. Hit subscribe and the bell, because today I'm telling you exactly what happens when the family bank finally says no, and the truth walks through the door. I guess it started when I was 11, wiping down tables at the original Harper's BBQ in Austin after school. The place smelled of mesquite smoke and brisket grease, and Dad always said the customers came for the food but stayed because someone actually cared if their tea glass stayed full. That someone was me. I learned early how to read a room full of hungry people. By 12, I could seat a party of 20, run credit cards, and fix the ancient register when it jammed, all while the cook shouted orders in Spanish and English. Dad called me reliable. Mom said I was unnatural. What they really meant was free labor they never had to put on payroll. Meanwhile, Ryan got new Jordan sneakers every season and a gaming computer that cost more than my entire year of tips. When he turned 15, Mom took my college savings envelope, $6,000 I'd hidden in an old boot, and handed it over for the down payment on his lifted Silverado. "Your brother needs to look the part," she told me in the office while the truck's exhaust rumbled outside. Ryan revved the engine twice, waved through the windshield, and never once said thank you. I kept waiting tables, picking up double shifts on weekends, counting every dollar because nobody else was going to pay for my classes. At 17, I was running the dinner rush by myself, training new servers, handling cash drops, and still biking home at 1 a.m. Dad would nod from his corner booth, cigarette burning between his fingers, and tell the regulars, "That's my daughter. She'll take over one day." He never asked if I wanted to. The pattern locked in long before I understood it. Ryan dreamed out loud, and I paid for the dreams. New dirt bike, spring break in Cancun, fraternity dues at UT, every time the envelope came out of my drawer and landed in his hands. I told myself it was temporary, that one day the restaurant would be mine, and it would all even out. But the restaurant was never the prize they were grooming me for. I was just the workhorse keeping the family name shiny until Ryan was ready to step into the spotlight, and I was too busy refilling iced tea and scrubbing grease off the floors to notice the difference between love and obligation. By the time Ryan got into UT Austin on early decision, I was already pulling 60-hour weeks between the restaurant and online classes. His acceptance letter arrived with a full tuition bill that made my stomach drop. Dad slid it across the kitchen island one morning and said family took care of its own. I logged into my account that same night and wired the first semester before I'd even bought textbooks for myself. Ryan moved into a brand new off-campus condo the parents put in his name. I kept the bunk bed in the back room above the original location, sirens from 6th Street leaking through the window at 3 a.m. while I balanced the nightly deposits. Every raise I earned went straight to covering his meal plan, his parking pass, the random $1,000 emergency texts that always came right before finals. Senior year, he decided the future of dining was a members-only steak club with a mobile waitlist app. Investors loved the pitch. They just needed $250,000 in seed money to finish the prototype. Mom organized a family dinner, sat me at the head of the table like it was my birthday, and explained how my name on the wiring instructions would make everything move faster. Ryan sat beside her scrolling mock-ups on his iPad, already talking about valuation. I transferred the money from the account I'd built scrubbing grease traps and praying the ancient POS system wouldn't crash during rush. The app launched to waiting lists and magazine features. Dad replaced the old neon sign out front with a digital banner that flashed proud supporters of Harper Reserve. Customers asked if I was the sister behind the tech. Staff laughed and said no. I was the one who still mopped floors after closing. Ryan flew to Miami for launch parties while I trained the third location's entire opening crew by myself. Every milestone he hit meant another withdrawal. Summer internship in Silicon Valley, business class tickets, first month rent in San Francisco, deposit on a Tesla so he'd look the part at pitch meetings. I picked up private catering gigs at 6 in the morning just to keep the direct deposits coming. Mom forwarded me the Forbes 30 Under 30 article with a single line. This is what we've all been working toward. I stopped counting how many times I told myself it would balance out eventually. The restaurant chain grew to 8 locations, and every expansion loan carried my signature as guarantor because my credit was clean and Ryan's didn't exist yet. I was 25, debt-free on paper, and completely empty in every account that actually belonged to me. 1 week before my 27th birthday, a thick cream envelope showed up in the restaurant mail. No return address except the gold embossed seal of Whitaker and Associates. Inside was a single page on heavy letterhead addressed to Lauren Elizabeth Harper. It stated that on the exact date I turned 27, the William Caldwell Revocable Trust would fully vest. Valuation as of the last quarter, $108 million. Source: a restaurant reservation and queue management patent William Caldwell filed in 1988, plus 35 years of compounded licensing fees, and the commercial real estate portfolio that grew out of it. The catch was buried in paragraph 7. William had added a handwritten codicil in 2017. The entire principal would pass only to the first direct descendant who reached age 27, having demonstrated continuous financial independence, meaning zero financial support from any family member or family-owned entity for the previous 5 consecutive years. A forensic accounting summary was attached. Every paycheck I had ever earned came from outside the Harper's BBQ payroll. Every rent payment, every community college tuition line item, every utility bill, every cent traced back to tips, catering side gigs, and tutoring jobs I booked myself. I had accidentally satisfied my grandfather's condition the day I turned 22. The letter ended with instructions to contact Thomas Whitaker immediately upon receipt, and a warning that any attempt by other parties to redirect, delay, or contest the distribution would trigger automatic freeze protocols. I read it 3 times behind the walk-in cooler, the hum of the compressors drowning out the dinner rush. William Caldwell had died when I was 9. I barely remembered him except for the way he used to slip me $20 bills and tell me to put it where no one else could touch it. I never understood why until that moment. That night I locked the office door, scanned every page, and emailed Thomas Whitaker from my private account. His reply came within minutes. He already knew who I was. The trust had been watching the independence markers for years, and he would handle everything personally from this point forward. For the first time in my life, money was coming in instead of going out, and no one in my family had any legal way to stop it. Thanksgiving dinner that year felt different the second I walked into the lake house. Every aunt, uncle, and cousin was already there. 45 people crammed around rented tables that stretched from the dining room into the living room. The smell of smoked turkey hung thick, but nobody was eating yet. Mom stood at the head, holding a leather folder instead of a carving knife. Dad sat beside her, arms crossed. Ryan leaned against the fireplace, scrolling his phone like he owned the room, which he basically did. Nicole Harper, my cousin who always acted more like an older sister, kept glancing between them and me with a tight smile. Mom finally spoke, voice soft enough that everyone leaned in. The trust letter had been forwarded to the family office by mistake. They knew the amount. They knew the independence clause. And they had decided the money belonged to all of us, not just one person who happened to check the right boxes. Dad slid the folder across the table. Inside was a power of attorney drafted the day before, giving him and Mom full control until the estate settled. Ryan added that his new restaurant group needed bridge financing immediately, or the Series A would collapse. Nicole chimed in that refusing would tear the family apart, that I was acting unstable even thinking about keeping it all. They passed the document down the tables like it was the gravy boat. Aunt Linda signed as witness. Uncle Ray nodded approval. Cousin after cousin murmured agreement. Mom watched me with the same sweet smile she used on difficult customers. Waiting for me to pick up the pen, I read every line, irrevocable line. Immediate transfer of authority. No revocation without court order. Distribution at their sole discretion. I closed the folder and pushed it back. No. The room went dead quiet. Ryan laughed first, short and sharp. Mom's smile froze. Dad leaned forward and reminded me the lake house was in the family trust. The car I drove was on the company insurance. The health plan I used was through the restaurants. Nicole stood up and said maybe I needed help, that nobody who turned their back on blood was thinking clearly. Dad gave me until the end of the weekend to change my mind or start looking for a new place to live. Mom added that no one would blame me if I needed therapy first. They all watched me walk out past the untouched food, the folder still sitting in the middle of the table like a loaded gun nobody had fired yet. 2 weeks later, they called a full family meeting at the original estate on Lake Travis. Every chair was taken, cousins on the stairs, kids on the floor, 45 people waiting for the show to start. The same leather folder sat open on the coffee table, fresh copies stacked beside it. A notary in a navy blazer stood by the door like security. Dad opened by saying this wasn't a discussion, it was a vote. Mom passed out printed pages titled, Family Unity Agreement. Ryan took the floor and explained how the restaurant group would collapse without immediate capital, how investors were watching, how one signature saved hundreds of jobs. Nicole walked the room handing out pens, telling everyone I had become paranoid, that I was spreading lies about money that never belonged to just one person. They formed a circle around me. Aunt Linda cried that blood doesn't abandon blood. Uncle Ray said mental health issues run in families and I clearly needed help. Cousin after cousin repeated the same lines until the room echoed. Mom placed the final copy in front of me and clicked a heavy silver pen. Sign, Lauren, for all of us. I stood up. My voice stayed flat. The trust says no overrides. I'm not signing anything. Nicole stepped forward first, face red, screaming that I was delusional, that no sane person would throw away family for money. Ryan moved behind her, jaw tight. Dad warned this was the last chance before lawyers got involved on both sides. The notary shifted uncomfortably. I turned toward the hallway. Ryan grabbed my shoulder hard and spun me back. Nicole kept shouting. I pulled away. He shoved harder. My heel caught the edge of the rug at the top of the staircase. The room tilted. I felt myself falling backward, arms reaching for nothing, then the sharp crack of marble on my spine and skull. People screamed. Someone yelled to call 911. Phones came out. Ryan stood frozen at the top, hands still out like he couldn't believe what they'd done. Mom rushed down the stairs crying my name. Dad barked at everyone to stay back while Nicole told the room it was an accident, that I slipped because I was hysterical. I tried to sit up. Pain exploded everywhere. Blood ran warm from the back of my head. The last thing I saw before everything blurred was the unsigned papers scattered across the floor, and 45 faces realizing the cameras were already rolling. I woke up to beeping machines and the sting of antiseptic in my nose. A nurse adjusted the IV while another checked the brace around my cracked ribs. Concussion, hairline fracture in one vertebra, 12 stitches along the scalp. The doctor signed the chart and told me I was lucky the marble lip broke my fall instead of my neck. Dad paced outside the glass the whole first day, demanding to be let in. Mom left flowers with no card. Ryan never showed. Security kept them all in the waiting room after I refused visitors. Sarah Mitchell, the hospital social worker, sat on a stool beside the bed and slid a pamphlet across the blanket. She said what happened at the house qualified as assault, that videos were already circulating, and a restraining order was ready if I wanted it. I asked for my phone. The screen was cracked, but still worked. One new email from Thomas Whitaker sat unopened, timestamped minutes after the ambulance left the estate. He was already on his way. He arrived in a dark suit carrying the same leather briefcase I remembered from childhood photographs with my grandfather. Thomas set it on the rolling tray, clicked the locks, and pulled out sealed folders stamped with the Caldwell family crest. He spoke quietly so the nurse wouldn't hear every detail. William had suspected diversion of patent royalties since the early 90s. He built triggers into the trust. Any physical coercion or competency challenge against the named beneficiary would automatically release forensic evidence to the probate court and the IRS. The shove down the stairs had just flipped the switch. Thomas opened the first folder. Bank records going back 35 years showed 72% of licensing income routed through shell entities controlled by Gregory and Pamela Harper. Forged signature amendments, backdated board minutes, fake loans to the restaurant chain that were never repaid. The second folder held original patents and notarized letters from William instructing Thomas to wait for the exact moment someone tried to take what wasn't theirs. By the time Thomas finished, every account linked to the trust had already been frozen remotely. Dad's corporate cards were declining at the vending machine downstairs. Ryan's investor deck presentations scheduled for that afternoon had turned into a cancellation email. Nicole's husband was blowing up the family group chat asking why their joint savings account showed 0. Thomas closed the briefcase and told me the next step was a guardianship hearing they had filed that morning, claiming I was mentally unfit. He smiled for the first time. They had just handed us the perfect stage to bury them. 6 months later, the federal courthouse in Austin smelled like old wood and desperation. Thomas laid out every forged document, every offshore transfer, every lie told to the IRS for 3.5 decades. The judge denied their guardianship petition in under 4 minutes and referred Gregory Harper, Pamela Harper, and 2 uncles for criminal prosecution. Reporters filled the hallway before the gavel even cooled. The restaurant chain folded within weeks. Vendors walked away the second the fraud headlines hit. The lake house sold at auction to cover tax liens. Dad took a night manager job at a gas station off I-35, polyester shirt 2 sizes too big. Mom moved into a 1-bedroom senior complex and stopped answering the phone when old bridge club friends called. Ryan lost the Tesla, the condo, the investor meetings. Last I heard, he was driving for a rideshare app in Houston, sleeping in the car between fares. Nicole and her husband filed bankruptcy after their accounts were seized as part of the conspiracy clawback. I filed the name change the same week the indictments dropped. Lauren Elizabeth Caldwell. No ceremony, just a clerk's stamp and a new driver's license. Thomas transferred the first clean dividend into an account that finally had only my name on it. I started a foundation that pays full-ride scholarships for women coming out of exactly the kind of family I escaped. No essays required, just proof they've been financially independent for 2 straight years while everyone around them took. The first cohort starts next fall. People keep asking if I feel bad, if I miss them, if blood should win in the end. Here is what I know now. Family isn't a blank check you're obligated to cash for life. Love doesn't come with a ledger. The second you realize you're not property, you stop acting like it. Cutting them off wasn't cruel. It was the first time I ever chose myself, and I sleep better than I ever have. If you're watching this and someone is telling you that you owe them your future just because you share DNA, listen carefully. You don't. Say no. Close the account. Walk away. The peace on the other side is worth every scream they'll throw at you. Blood makes you related. It doesn't make you a bank.